Good evening. Just had a little audio issue. Um, we're going to start in a minute. Just want to give a couple of instructions. Just a reminder that these are recorded um, and posted to our member areas for future viewing. Just want to make you aware of that. And if you have any questions along the way, please type them into you've probably seen me doing this without any audio, the questions tab in our little portal here. Just enter your question right here and send it to all, and I will answer each question at the end of the presentation. Okay? I think we are going to go ahead and get started. So this is a webinar on saving your season from injury. Happy Tax Day. So of the 5 cornerstones that we have at QT2, training, nutrition and rest, race fueling, pacing, and mental fitness, this webinar is really going to focus on both training and mental fitness. Okay? So this is my disclaimer. While I am a certified USAT triathlon coach, I am in no way a medical professional. I have never been to medical school, nor have I ever entertained the thought. Any and all potential injuries should be fully evaluated by your doctor, and his or her recommendations should be followed to the letter. This presentation is intended to help you to identify and treat potential injuries from the standpoint of training for the sport of triathlon. Prior to utilizing any of the following prescriptions, your injury should be diagnosed and our injury protocols approved by your doctor. Just a reminder that we are talking about injuries, and if anything is incorrectly diagnosed, it could lead to mistreatment, which could further prolong an injury. So those kinds of things should definitely be evaluated by a doctor and not just a triathlon coach. So some guiding philosophies that we have here at QT2 are when it comes to injury. Unless there's a stress fracture, do as much as is possible while pain is at or below a 3 out of 10. Okay. If it is a soft tissue injury, completely stopping activity can actually exacerbate the issue because it will likely tighten up and easily be irritated upon restart. So oftentimes athletes will have some bother. Maybe the Achilles is bothering them a bit, so they just stop all activity. And what happens is we spend so much time stretching out this soft tissue stuff, and then when we stop doing it, when we stop using it, it starts to tighten up greatly, which can actually make the injury, prolong the injury when we restart the activity after some period off. So we try to stay as active as humanly possible. As long as the pain is at a low threshold. Ice only the inflammation. Oh, I'm sorry. Ice only until inflammation subsides, and then stop. Doing this 3 times a day for 20 minutes will help reduce acute inflammation. Okay, one thing people often do, and I can say I have fallen guilty to this myself, is you have some inflammation, so you start icing. And you may ice for 45 minutes, for an hour. You may have an ice pack on there for a couple hours. That can actually cause more issue because while the swelling will go down, it can make the soft tissue that is the injury area less pliable. So it actually tightens up. So we have to be really careful with ice. Don't overdo it. Injuries are usually a combination of 2 or more things. So, for instance, it usually comes from pushing too hard and having shoes that are too old. It could come from pushing too hard and having your cleat placement off. Okay, so these 2 things, 2 or more things, will usually can often combine into an injury. It's usually not just one thing that happens. And lastly, plantar fasciitis and Achilles tendonitis are commonly caused by the same exact issue, just manifested in different places. Okay, and we're going to see a trend in much of the presentation, especially with regards to the lower body injuries. Some simple steps to help avoid injury. Number one, do not add intensity. This is often a triathlete's greatest sin. We try to add too much intensity into our training. Do not add volume. Okay, both of these things can overdraw on your stress budget, because especially if you have a plan through QT2 systems, then we have already maxed you out on the amount of stress that we believe you can handle based upon your logistical limiters and your past experience. So we are already pushing at the very top of what we believe you can handle. So by you adding intensity and or volume or just stress in general, then you are going above and beyond your stress budget, and that can oftentimes lead to injury. Try not to exceed 10 pounds of race weight. This is a general philosophy that we have across the board, but in terms of injury, it just reduces the amount of pounding on the body, especially when you start running again. Focus on a set period of strength training. We are very strong proponents of strength training early in the season because it builds lean muscle mass, and lean muscle mass is often the key to remaining healthy and not breaking down. Most injuries occur as a result of muscle breakdown, so a period of strength training can help to offset that. Do not skip core workouts, and this is, as triathletes, we do so many, we make so many sacrifices in our lives and in our training, and sometimes things have to, we look for ways that we can maybe take some shortcuts, and core workouts are often the workouts who suffer the most, and these are often the workouts that we can't afford to allow to suffer the most, because they can end up sidelining us if we don't fully respect them. Always think of core workouts as the glue that holds you together. Okay. Always use a recovery drink following workouts. You need to refuel those muscles after they've been glycogen depleted. A fatigued muscle can become a weak muscle, so keep those muscles hydrated and recovered. And the next point is make sure you are hydrating before, during, and after all training and racing activities. Never do anything with pain beyond a 3 out of 10. You're going to see a lot of that today. Never forget that pain is the body's message to us that something is off. And while it's okay to maybe push the line a little bit, because if something is a 3 or below out of 10, as soon as it goes above that threshold, then we really risk further injury to the body and maybe making something much worse than it needs to be. And lastly, when something starts becoming bothersome, make a change. Change something. Classic example is, if your knee starts to bother you and you feel like, hey, you know what, it's been a while since I changed my bike cleats. Change your bike cleats, because that may be the exact cause of what's going on. And the very last point, doing the same thing will result in the same result. Dealing with the mental side of an injury-plagued season. This is another area where triathletes really struggle, because we do work so hard and we are so goal-oriented. When injury strikes, we have a really difficult time coping with it. We need to keep in mind that triathlon is inherently a physical stress on the body, and anything that is physically stressful could yield injury if we do too much too soon to our bodies. So just be aware that triathlon as a sport is risky when it comes to injury. Understand that injuries come about in the course of an active person's lifestyle. I believe I already stated that. When injuries occur, focus on managing it. Don't dwell on it. We need to manage, how am I going to get beyond this? Because I know I am participating in something that could lead to injury, so now that I am injured, what am I going to do to get myself in the right direction towards getting over it still making forward progress. And yes, so to that point, identify the things that you can do and don't dwell on the things that you cannot. Okay, so if you have an injury where the pain is of greater than 3 out of 10 when you're running, and you're not able to run, don't focus on the fact that you can't run. You want to manage the time that you have, the extra time that you have because you're not running, and focus on the things that you can do better with your swimming, biking, nutrition, hydration, sleep, and mental preparations. Okay, and use the injury as an opportunity to focus on other parts of your overall prep, and explore ways of driving fitness forward despite specific limitations. Okay, just because you can't run does not mean that you need to stop activity of all kinds, because there are still ways to make aerobic progress and drive fitness forward. So when is a season salvageable and when is it not? So salvageable injuries, when an injury does not require immobilization. Most soft tissue injuries will result in salvageable seasons, and most upper body broken bones will result in salvageable seasons. For example, a broken wrist or a broken collarbone. Unsalvageable, if you are going to be down and out for 6 or more weeks, if your injury requires immobilization, for instance, a brace around your knee for more than six or more weeks that doesn't allow you to cycle or run, then your season is probably lost. Any kind of tear, like an ACL tear, a meniscal tear, a rupture, like an Achilles rupture, or a true fracture of a bone, will probably result in an unsalvageable season. So what to do when your season is lost? The number one thing you can do is accept it. Okay, if your season is gone, it is gone, and you just have to deal with that fact. One of the greatest things one of the greatest pieces of advice I've heard in the past and actually seen executed is how my wife Kate, in 2006, she tore her ACL and her season was lost. And she saw it as an opportunity to fully heal and come back stronger the following season. That doesn't mean that she was without concern and that she was very, very frustrated early on in the process, but she came to grips with it, and she truly did follow the surgeon and physical therapist advice to the letter of the law all the way throughout. And I think we have all seen the results. That ACL tear, that knee is much stronger than it was prior to the injury. So she really exemplified that second bullet, both the first and second bullet. Consider activities and events that are not limited by your injury and will not hinder recovery. So just because your season is lost does not mean you can't be active. Okay, and it's still okay to, and probably a good idea to be in some way connected to the sport, whatever it is, while you're injured. There are still things that you can do that to stay within the sport, so that when you do come back from your injury, you're not starting completely anew. When does something become an injury? When it becomes limiting. Okay, if you're running down the road and you are limping, you are injured. Okay, and that's something. So you really need to take heed and maybe and fully get a full diagnosis of what is going on. If some kind of pain is limiting your mechanics or form in some way, then you are probably dealing with an injury. So we're going to run through a list now of some salvageable injuries. These are just injuries that you can probably come back from and not lose your season if managed properly. Number one is a broken upper body bone. So for an example, I'm talking about a collarbone, and usually this comes from a crash. I had an athlete last year who late winter, early spring was pretending he was Bodie Miller on the ski slopes and crashed and broke his collarbone pretty badly. And he was able to definitely salvage his season. We lost a bit of swimming time, but in the end, we really didn't feel like it impacted us too much as the season went on. The early season races were definitely affected, especially in the swim, and maybe a bit in the run. But as we continued throughout the season, things really looked pretty good because the injury was well managed. A broken collarbone, the recovery time is probably going to be about 6 to 8 weeks, including 3 to 4 weeks of immobilization. And by immobilization, I mean of the, let's say you break your right clavicle, the right arm is probably going to be immobilized against the body for 3 to 4 weeks. So what that does is limits you from doing any kind of serious swimming. You're probably not going to be swimming for most of the 6 to 8 weeks seriously. Probably after 3 to 4, you may be able to get in the water and do some drill work and just light swimming. But any kind of key workouts are just not going to happen probably for most of the full 8 weeks. Running is definitely out during the immobilization period and can come back after the 3 to 4 weeks as long as there is no pain. And definitely outdoor riding is out mainly definitely for the immobilization period and slowly built back into after during the 6 to 8 weeks. But the big issue there is the concern of another crash and re-breaking the bone. You want to give the bone plenty of time to heal before you go and fall on it again. Okay, and so to drive progress, if you do find yourself in this predicament, ride the trainer to maintain fitness, focus on further developing cycling capacity and overall bike run durability. So you were able to continue to build aerobic efficiency on the bike all the way through. You can definitely ride the trainer the whole time and maybe a little uncomfortable at first, but it's the season is not lost as a result of this. Next is plantar fasciitis, and we have seen this pop up in athletes from time to time. This is one of those injuries that when I was new to the sport I had heard horror stories of and scared me to death. But if well managed, then it can be taken care of pretty quickly. So a typical cause of plantar fasciitis are weak or tight soleus and or gastroc muscles. Those are the muscles of the calves. The recovery time from plantar fasciitis, and I'm sure that some would find this very hard to believe, can be less than 2 weeks if you catch it immediately, if you catch it and treat it immediately. If you do not, then we are talking 6 to 8 weeks or longer. And this is one of those injuries that can really bother you for quite some time if you do not identify it and treat it immediately. But if you do, then you may be out of the woods within 2 weeks. And just it's kind of difficult because plantar fasciitis is pain in the bottom of the foot, usually around the heel, and so it can be hard to identify that as actually being a calf muscle issue of the calf muscles. But that is where the weakness or tightness lies, and so that's where it needs to be treated. The potential fixes for plantar fasciitis are an immediate grafting procedure. You'd have to go to a physical therapist or a chiropractor for that, and that is a very intensive type of massage directly on the area, often using medieval metal tools that they're not really medieval, but they look like they are, that really dig into the area and break up any scar tissue and try to stretch out the area as much as possible. Also, focused massage of the soleus and gastroc. So you want to get to a massage therapist and do some focused massage on the calves. Eccentric calf raises. Once the pain is less than 3 out of 10, and then going forward, use soft-soled shoes. And I would probably recommend this throughout, even when you're not able to run, just in your day-to-day life, using soft-soled shoes because it distributes the load throughout the entire foot and not just in one area. And so that includes, going to work. It may necessitate you to, wear some alternative footwear to work if you are someone who wears dress shoes that do not have much support or heels. Then you may need to let the fashion go for a bit and wear some sneaker type shoes while you're treating that injury. To drive progress during plantar fasciitis, you're going to run as the pain allows and use our run injury protocol for any run volume that you're not able to complete. And I will go over the run injury protocol later on. IT band syndrome. This is another biggie. Anything can cause IT band syndrome. IT band syndrome is one of those things that we don't exactly know where it comes from, but we know exactly what it is. It can often be too big of a jump in mileage or training stress. It could be hip and or quad weakness, running shoes that are too old. It could be from running on a banked surface too long. For instance, if you always run on the same side of the road, that can cause IT band syndrome. Just many things can cause IT band syndrome. So the issue with IT band syndrome is it comes on with very little warning, and once it hits, it's in there. So once you get it, you're typically looking at 4 to 6 weeks of recovery. So we have a whole system that we use in order to try and treat IT band syndrome. But one potential fix is stop running at the first onset of pain. And you just have to be careful with that, because you could be running down the road and 1 mile is fine, and the next mile you have IT band syndrome. It just comes on that quickly. So as soon as you feel any kind of pain, stop immediately. And IT band syndrome will typically be pain right on the side of the leg. There's a say like an elastic type band that runs from the outside of your knee up to your hip, and that gets very tight, and that's typically where the pain will manifest. Typically down around the knee at the connection point, right around there. If you feel any pain in that area, it's on the outside side of the knee, right around the connection point, then you are in danger of quickly developing IT band syndrome, and you should follow this protocol. So stop running at any sign of pain. Change your running shoes immediately. You may want to switch to a shoe that has a higher, a steeper heel lift, I guess. And then you want to also get in and do some deep tissue massage at least twice a week. To this end, I would highly recommend a foam roller. I believe we all know what that is. If you do not, then remind me to show you what it is later on. That can really get good deep stretching and massage onto the IT band. It is a very painful 10 minutes of your life, but it is well worth it. And it's also, I would highly recommend using that foam roller probably on a nightly basis after a run or any kind of workout, just to keep the IT band loose, throughout. To drive progress, run as the pain allows, and use our run injury protocol for any remaining volume. I'm going to do a little more talking about IT band syndrome because it is so typical among athletes, and it is once it gets in there, it stays around, so it can be difficult to treat. So how do you get back to running if you do develop IT band syndrome? I would recommend this approach. Number one, once the pain is not felt at rest. So IT band syndrome is one of those things that you will feel at rest, just walking around, or sometimes you can actually promote the pain by touching an area. You can tell that the IT band is very tight. Once you do not feel that pain anymore, try a run that just has no preset duration. I'm just going to go out and run, and just stop as soon as you feel any pain. Okay. Now, so let's say you decide I'm going to go out and run. I'm going to try, and no, I'm going to have no preset duration. I'm just going to run until I don't run anymore or I feel pain. Number two, run 2 days later. So you finish your run, you run 2 days later with no preset duration. If this run ends up being longer in duration than the first, then continue this routine of running every other day until you can run 45 minutes continuously. So you run every other day until you can run 45 minutes without any pain whatsoever. If the second run is shorter than the first run, the run in number 1, then try running again 3 days later rather than every other day. If that run is longer, then go back to 2 days. If that run is shorter, then go to 4 days. Okay, so what we're trying to do here is, oftentimes IT band syndrome, the number one thing, probably the best thing for IT band syndrome is rest, but at the same time we're trying to remain active, and because we don't like things to tighten up, so we can't allow too much rest, but we want to try and continue testing it, but not too often, because there's obviously something going on that's not allowing it to heal. So we want to try every other day. If there's an issue, give it a little more rest. If there's still an issue, give it a little more rest, and until we are able to get back on track. So a stretching routine for IT band syndrome. You want to do the stretching routine every day and follow it right to the letter. The first stretch I'm going to talk about is this stretch number 1, essentially touching your toes with your good leg in front of your bad leg. You want to hold the stretch for 30 seconds and repeat it 3 times. Okay, so good leg in front of the bad leg. Okay, hold it for 30 seconds, as low as you can go, and repeat it for 30 seconds, as low as you can go without. Miles and use the run injury protocol for the remaining run volume. Also, another thing you may want to do is seriously consider your run volume, because shin splints are probably the result of too much volume, too much too soon. So sounds to me like you probably need to reconsider how much running volume that you're doing. So what is the lower leg routine? This is going to be three sets of 12 reps for each foot of eccentric calf raises, where each rep is carried out by standing on the ball of your foot on the step, lowering slowly with one leg over a 2 to 3 second period for full range of motion, and then lifting back to the top with both feet. These will help strengthen and stretch your calves. Inverse toe raises, seated using a resistance band looped around your toe or upper foot, as well as the leg of a table. Flex your toes slowly towards you. Okay, so the your foot would be between your head and the table, and the resistance band is connecting your foot and the table, and you're pulling your toes towards your body. Okay. A left flex, which is seated using a resistance band looped around your toe, as well as the leg of a table. Flex your toe toward the left. Okay, so you're probably going to be sitting such that the band the table is going to be on your right-hand side. Okay, and there's the resistance band is connected at the foot and at the table, and you're pulling left. Okay, and then the right flex is just going to be the opposite, seating using a resistance band looped around your toe, as well as the leg of the table. Flex your toe toward the right. Okay, that's just going to be the opposite, where you're sitting on the other side of the table leg. Okay, as you get stronger, move to stiffer bands to maintain 12 reps with some fatigue. And if any athletes do end up, unfortunately, needing the lower leg routine, just request it from your coach, and we can put it directly into your training plan, or give it to you for your personal records. Achilles tendonitis, as discussed earlier, Achilles tendonitis is just plantar fasciitis in a different place. It results from weak or tight calf muscles, the soleus and gastrocs. Recovery time, Achilles tendonitis gets a really bad rap, but if caught immediately, Achilles tendonitis can be cleaned up in less than 2 weeks, or it can really become a problem for 6 to 8 weeks if you allow it to linger. Just like plantar fasciitis, you want immediate grafting procedure, focus massage, eccentric calf raises, and soft sole shoes. Run as pain allows, and use the run injury protocol for any remaining volume. Patella tendonitis. This is one that I have dealt with in the past. Possible causes can be weak or tight quads, excessive muscle fatigue from too much riding and or running, and potential tracking issues from imbalance in quad muscles. 2 of these are easily fixed by the athlete. The first 2, weak and tight quads, that is something we can definitely work on. A tracking issue may require a bit more intensive work. Recovery time from patella tendonitis can be less than 2 weeks if caught immediately, or take as long as 4 to 6 weeks, but typically not too much longer if you treat it. If you don't treat it, then it can be a major issue. Limitations, typically pain running, especially when you start running, where you'll typically, the patella tendon is the tendon that connects your patella to your lower leg bone, I believe the tibia, and what that does is get inflamed, so that when you go to run pretty early on, it will really hurt for the first 5 or so minutes, and then it will warm up and kind of stretch out, and it doesn't really hurt anymore too badly. It typically bothers you if you're going downstairs or doing any kind of heavy gear riding. To drive progress, you run as the pain allows, and use the run injury protocol. I would also recommend having your bike fit looked at, because oftentimes it can be the result of your seat being much too low and or your improper cleat placement on your bike shoes. Just putting too much stress on the body, on the patella tendon, I'm sorry. Shoulder pain or tendonitis in the shoulder. Oftentimes in triathletes, a possible cause can be poor technique, pushing down on the water rather than pulling it back, a lack of a catch, or crossover at mid-pull. So if you are taking a stroke, and as you are pulling the water, you actually cross over your body. You may be pretty susceptible to tendonitis or shoulder pain. Recovery time is less than 2 weeks if you catch it immediately. And the usual fix amongst triathletes would be to really focus on technique work, because typically it's going to be some kind of stroke mechanic issue that's causing that. The swimming is pretty easy on the body unless you are doing something grossly incorrect in technique, which can then cause a lot of stress on the body swimming-wise. So the best fix is usually just to clean up the technique issue that you probably have. And most triathletes, myself included, often have pretty obvious issues with our stroke mechanics. To drive progress, you continue swimming. Definitely work on drill sets that will help your efficiency and eliminate crossover. That's not just for the pain, but also just good practice anyway, to become more efficient in the water. We usually eliminate paddle work if you're feeling any shoulder pain, because it's just why add resistance to something that already hurts. And then also we like to prescribe the swim cord routine just to focus on continuing to develop strength if you're unable to swim for any reason. A stress fracture. Oftentimes a stress fracture will be the result of weak or tight soleus and gastroc muscles, so the muscles of the calves again. A stress fracture will typically present itself on the tibia about 3 to 4 inches above the heel on the medial side. Or it could present itself in the metatarsal on the top of the foot. And in each of these cases, oftentimes a weak or tight calf muscle is the culprit. Recovery time is typically 4 to 8 weeks, and the potential fix is, number one, rest, and then we have a calcium routine that we can utilize, which I will discuss later. But for a stress fracture, we're probably going to do, probably going to make it so you cannot run, but we're going to try to drive progress by doing some deep water running only and additional bike volume. Hip flexor strengthening with weighted marches, so you would actually either have a resistance band or ankle weights and just make a marching motion, and that's to further drive hip flexor durability, because a stress fracture is going to leave us sidelined for 4 to 8 weeks. So we really have to be careful of our durability, especially as we're training for longer races. So we try to target those hip flexor muscles, and then sometimes we can utilize a bone stimulator, which is available through physical therapy or can be bought online. Muscle pulls, just the everyday muscle pull. Typical cause of a muscle pull is going to be tight or weak muscle. Just keep in mind that a tight muscle is a weak muscle. So if you're experiencing any kind of muscle tightness, then you're experiencing muscle weakness as well. So just be aware of that. Muscle pulls can result from unreasonable loading and or fatigue. A recovery time for a muscle pull can be 2 to 4 weeks. And in terms of muscle pulls, it's often believed that if you do pull a muscle, that you should stay away from any kind of strength routine. But that's actually the opposite. It's kind of counterintuitive. Strengthening is almost never wrong, as long as the pain is no greater than 3 out of 10. Just keep that in mind. But if a pulled muscle is a weak muscle which needs to be strengthened, so strengthening cannot be the wrong answer for that. Okay. And icing is a good idea, but again, keep in mind that we only ice for 20 minutes at a time to eliminate inflammation. Once that inflammation is gone, then we take the ice off. Okay, and maybe repeat later if it reoccurs. But icing is only there to eliminate any kind of inflammation. Lower back pain. This is something that occurs pretty often in athletes, and I think that the often who gets blamed is aero bars and riding in an aerodynamic position, but that may not necessarily be the case. Possible causes of lower back pain are tight hamstrings or tightness in the lower back, hip weakness from running, or a drastic disconnect between the hips and shoulders when swimming. Okay, so this one thing that a connection that we oftentimes definitely don't draw is lower back pain coming as a result of swimming. Just a possibility, but I think that riding in an aerodynamic position oftentimes gets most of the blame, but most of the time it's lower back pain as a result of tight hamstrings. Okay, a potential fix is core work, specifically back extensions and monster walks to address lower back and hips respectively. Stretching, strengthening, and massage to address tight hamstrings. And then the timing drill and single arm swimming to address disconnect between hips and shoulders. I'm going to discuss the timing drill later on, but single arm swimming is swimming with, just as it sounds, single arm. But so you say you would swim at 25 in the pool, and let's say you're only going to use your right arm. The left arm would hang at your side. Okay, so it would stay along the body at your side, not out in front of you, but at your side. This is going to force the body to rotate as a whole, okay, and make a nice connection so that as the shoulders turn, so do the hips, okay, as one. And that's really the goal that we're going after, because oftentimes lower back pain can be the result of poor mechanics in that area, poor swimming mechanics in that area. Okay, now the next one is low iron levels or anemia. This is not an injury in the way that we typically think of it, but it can definitely be an issue that causes a good deal of, it hinders performance, and as a result could be considered an injury. So this symptoms of low iron levels can be depression, fatigue, weakness, and or irritability. If you suspect this, and oftentimes it may require someone close to you to identify that maybe your iron levels are maybe a little off, because these symptoms can be pretty subtle. It's a good idea to request a CBC, iron building profile, and a ferritin check from your doctor. Any of the following may be indicative of potential anemia, but you should definitely confirm with your doctor. So I'm going to give you some information here that may be evidence of low iron, and if you suspect that you may have low iron, then you should definitely talk to your doctor and maybe point out these things. If ferritin is less than 50, if iron binding capacity is greater than 375 micrograms per DL, I'm not exactly sure on that unit. If transferrin saturation is less than 20%, if transferrin is greater than 280 milligrams per DL, if serum iron is less than 100, if MCV is greater than 95, or HGB is less than 13.5. Okay, the existence of any one of these may mean that you have low iron levels. So if upon analyzing your own blood work, the results of your blood work, you see any of these things pop up, then you may want to talk to your doctor about the potential of having low iron levels. Do not take it into your own hands. Iron is not something that should be taken lightly. It is something that should only be taken with the care of a doctor, because iron can be actually harmful if it's too much of it in your body. So do not mess around with supplementation on your own. Tips for iron supplementation. Only do so under a doctor's orders or supervision. Low iron levels are best supplemented with a First Endurance Multi-V, that's a specific brand, because it has B12, and amino acid chelate iron. Orange juice and or vitamin C can help to aid iron absorption if taken with the supplement. And lastly, keep in mind, and I'm sure one of these things is really going to bother some of you, but milk, caffeine, antacids, and calcium supplements can interfere with iron absorption. Never take these with your supplement. Supplement is spelled incorrectly there. I will fix that later. So caffeine, that's the big one. Okay, you need, if you suspect that you are anemic and you are being treated for that by your doctor, do not take your iron supplements with coffee or any other kind of caffeine source. So the injury protocols that I alluded to earlier, let's go over those now. The first one that's going to pop up is the run injury protocol. I think I mentioned that several times during this presentation. So during the run injury protocol, you want to remain as active as your injury allows. Complete 50% of assigned running volume as additional bike volume. Complete the remaining 50% of assigned running volume as deep water running or power cranks on the bike. Adjust your heart rate zones down 10% for water running. And then lastly, if your period of non-running is greater than 4 weeks, then incorporate stretch band marches as previously discussed, and definitely consider the use of power cranks. So typically, if we have an athlete who needs to go to the run injury protocol, then unfortunately, ironically, it can be called RIP. But what we will do is have that athlete take their running volume and take half of it. So let's say an athlete was to run 5 hours in a week. Okay, then for 2.5 hours, they're gonna take 2.5 of those 5 hours and add it to bike volume throughout the week. Okay, it can go in part or in whole. It can go as additional rides, but 2.5 hours of additional bike volume during the week, and then the other half of that volume, so the other 2.5 hours, we're going to typically use deep water running. So actually going to a pool and just making a running motion through the deep end, and you can actually do a good deal of stimulation through that. It can actually really work the hip flexors very, very well. If just the biggest downside of deep water running is it can tend to be very, very boring. But if treated properly, if you treat your injury properly, then you only have to do it for a short time. So it might only be a week or two that you have to do the deep water running. So it can't be that boring. And if you have to do it longer, then you're probably not treating your injury correctly. So that should act as a motivation for you. And just keep in mind that you are not going to be able to maintain your typical running heart rate zones if you're deep water running, so we adjust those down about 10% when you're running in the water. Okay, and the use of power cranks can always be very helpful for running. Power cranks are actually sold as a cycling tool, but we have found that they definitely aid in running the best because they really, really work the hip flexor muscles and can actually be a very good device for any athletes who have a significant running weakness. Power cranks are an excellent option, or consideration, I should say. A mental fitness protocol. If you find yourself suffering from any kind of mental fitness issues, so you just have a lack of confidence, number one thing to do is focus on confidence. We're going to talk about positive reinforcement, think and act confidently, discuss self-imposed pressure, learn from bad days. This is essential for improvement. Use imagery, coping imagery. So imagine that you're riding down the road and you get a flat tire. What are you going to do? Imagine what you're going to do. See yourself doing it. Imagine your best possible performance. What would that look like? What can you imagine? What would you see in the race if you're having your best possible performance? And imagine yourself being successful. Self-talk. Develop a script for yourself. So when things become difficult for you, you have a script that you can fall to say, I am strong, I am tough, I can get up this hill. those kinds of things, cue words for different scenarios, so that if you're hurting, you can start to use, remind yourself of some cue words that will put you in a better mindset. And then always remain task relevant. So task relevant means you are thinking about the activity at hand and not some other outside influence. For instance, that your husband or wife is going to be so disappointed in you if you don't, you know, run the marathon at a certain time. Okay, that is task irrelevance. You want to just focus on what it takes for you to do your best possible performance and not worry about those outside influences, because chances are those task irrelevant things that you were thinking of really don't exist in actuality. Energy control, we talk about an inverted U, which is really about all about arousal. So do you have trouble, are you one of those athletes who gets too excited at the beginning of a race and has trouble pacing yourself? Or are you one of those athletes who is far too relaxed at the beginning of a race and has trouble getting yourself up to perform at a high level? Where's the delicate balance? How do we find that? Okay, and what necessitates it? So if you are an athlete who gets very hyper before a race, then you may want to consider not using caffeine before a race start. If you're one of those athletes who is far too relaxed, then we may need some caffeine at the beginning of a race just to get you going. And cue words can help you to either relax or get pumped up. And one key thing for energy control is to do your best to simulate the pressures of race day when you're training. And then lastly, focus. You want to uncover covert thinking. Are you doing things or thinking things in your training and racing that you're unaware of that are hindering your progress? You want to be honest with yourself and try to identify areas that you can improve on in that area. Okay, what is actually going through your head, and is it not helping you to be the best that you can be on that day? And our calcium routine. So why do we use a calcium routine? We use a calcium routine when treating a stress fracture to further strengthen a vulnerable bone and or connection point. So below is only an example of what may be recommended, as specific prescriptions are dependent upon weight, height, age, and gender, and should always, 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 always be considered in consultation with a medical doctor. Do not mess around with this. You do not take calcium for the heck of taking calcium. The goal is typically, depending upon the person, may be 18 to 2,000 milligrams of calcium and 800 international units of vitamin D. So what is this calcium routine? And this is for some non-specific athlete. You may take one Viactive each day, which is the equivalent of 500 milligrams of calcium and 500 international units of vitamin D. 2% Faya yogurt each day, which is 250 milligrams of calcium. 1 serving of broccoli each night, which is approximately 250 milligrams of calcium. 2% polio string cheese each day for 150 milligrams of calcium, and 2 scoops of designer whey protein each day for about 200 milligrams of calcium. The remainder of your calcium and vitamin D should be supplied through normal dietary intake, and not through supplementation. But as I've stated, make sure that you are not messing around with calcium and experimenting on your own. You should talk to a doctor about that before using it. And lastly, the timing rotation drill set. This is used to treat the potential cause of lower back pain, and even if an athlete didn't have lower back pain, if they had an extreme disconnect between their hips and their shoulders and their swimming. The goal is to connect the hips and shoulders during the swim stroke, and what is it? So the main set is just a 300 swim, a 100 skate, a 100 pull. We follow that down 300, 200, 100. For the pulls, we are focusing on good rotation with the belly facing the side of the pool after each stroke. And if the belly is facing the side of the pool, that means the hips and the shoulders have to be. So that's the goal there. That's what you're trying to channel. And then we use 3 times through, 2 by 25 right arm. So this is the single arm swimming I was talking about earlier. So if you're doing the right arm, that means the left arm is down by your side. This is much easier said than done. So if you can really work on this single arm swimming, you will certainly have a pretty nice connection between your hips and your shoulders when you do swim. So 2 by 25 right arm, 5 seconds rest between each set. Just do a 50 free where you're actually focusing on connecting the shoulders to the hips. So you're actually trying to execute what you just did in the drill in an actual stroke. And then do the same on the left side. Okay. And this is the goal, to be Andy Salmon. Okay. And that ends our presentation. I will now take any questions that you may have, assuming that I can pull this up. So I'm now going to go into the questions. And I have a question from Ken. Please feel free to write in any questions if you have them. When doing bike training, subs for running, so if you're on the run injury protocol and you're doing bike training instead of running, what heart rate do you use? Same heart rate as run or same heart rate zone as you would be for run? I use zone 2 run becomes zone 2 bike, or keep heart rate as prescribed for run. So very good question, and we get this a lot. If you are on, basically, if you're doing an activity, you use that heart rate zone. Okay, so just because you are simulating run volume but you're on the bike does not mean you use run heart rate zones. You are on the bike, so you use bike heart rate zones. Okay. The only time we alter the heart rate zones is when we deep water run, but we are actually, and because deep water running, there's no way you'll be able to simulate that kind of heart rate for deep water running, so we just reduce it by 10%. But if you are running, you use run heart rate zones. If you're on the bike, for whatever reason, you use bike heart rate zones. And Ken said thanks. No problem. No problem, Ken. Do you have any questions? Nothing here. I'll give people a minute or two to ask any questions you may have. If there aren't any questions, then that will conclude our webinar, but I'm just going to give you a minute or two just to type in anything that you may have. And I'll ask as they arise.